you.
So the partial government shutdown may be over for now, but it is too late to reverse some of the impacts.
Yeah, for example, so the State Department of Natural Resources says a 700-person wildfire training exercise had to be canceled in Yakima. Our state's Commissioner of Public Lands tweeting out that the team tasked with planning that training, I should say, was made up in part of furloughed federal workers, and that the exercise simply can't be rescheduled. Commissioner Hilary Franz joins us, our own Brandi Kruse, here this morning in studio to talk about the impact of this.
Good morning, Commissioner Franz. We appreciate you being here. So is that just blowing smoke to get the attention of elected leaders, or is that training exercise canceled, cannot be rescheduled?
No, this is a very serious. We have already had to cancel multiple training efforts. We use this time before fire season to get our firefighters trained and ready, to get our equipment inspected, and to get our contracts in place. And because we work so closely fighting our fires with our federal agencies, this time is essential. And we've already had to cancel multiple training, and we're not able to bring those back online.
Can we try to gauge what the impact of that might be as we get into the fire season?
We can try. Right now, though, we need to spend all of our time just getting all of our training that we do ourselves here in Washington State online and help our federal agencies be ready as well.
I want to ask you one more thing about the federal government. The president has taken some shots at California. They had a terrible, deadly, horrible wildfire season, talking about, withholding funds and how California is dealing with its wildfires. Do you worry about that? Because when it comes to fighting wildfires, the cooperation between the federal government and states is absolutely imperative.
Our work with the federal government is essential. We cannot fight these fires in Washington State over the breadth of landscape we have without our federal and our local firefighters. Partnership is essential. I think it's horrific, the language that was utilized by the president in the context of California's most fatal, deadly, horrific, costly fires. Right now, when we're in the context of fire, if our firefighters are doing everything to cross the boundaries and the geographies they come from, to put their lives on the line and protect our communities, we need to do everything to have their back. And that's the time where everyone should be coming together and not throwing anyone under the bus, but instead putting their efforts together.
Okay, you guys have a lot going on right now. On top of the shutdown and the impacts that had to training, you are in the middle of proposing a couple different things, and we've had John to discuss it before. Some efforts to hire more personnel, but also a big 20-year effort to try to make sure that our forests are healthier and so they're not burning in the long term. Let's just start with the wildfire proposal. You need more people out there fighting fires. You need more helicopters. How has this been received in Olympia?
It has been received well. As we know, this last year in 2018, we had the worst wildfire season on record. We had 1,850 fires, most ever in Washington State's history. And we had 40% of those west of the Cascades. So every single corner of Washington State was touched by wildfire, as well as the smoke, as we remember. And I think it raised the profile of how challenging our situation is and how bad it's getting. Our legislator is coming together. We've had really great conversations about the budget package we put forward, which is very strategic about, one, making sure we have the firefighting efforts, not only the helicopters that help us keep those fires small, 95% of them below 10 acres, leveraging those our helicopters, but in addition to that, making sure that we had firefighters that were trained and could be more independent. Washington State being reliable on itself to be able to have the manpower to put those fires out.
Can you talk about the prevention efforts? So we're looking 20 years down the road, an effort to try to keep our forests healthy. And we look at the smoke that we had in Seattle, how the summers have become just increasingly worse, wildfire season. So can you explain to people why it's necessary to kind of look 20 years down the road as opposed to, can we get this done any quicker than that?
In Washington State, we have a forest health crisis. It's why we're seeing more catastrophic wildfires with 2.7 million acres of forest in eastern Washington alone that are dying. It's why one spark will quickly take a 100-acre fire to thousands of acres. We have to get on top of this. The reason it's going to take 20 years for us to get on top of it is because it's been 100 years in the making where we have not treated those forests and made them more resilient in the face of hotter, drier temperatures. And so this plan requires us to treat 70,000 acres a year. over the next 20 years. When I started at the Department of Natural Resources, we had less than 2 people doing forest health treatments. We need to rapidly accelerate not only the manpower to get on those forests, but we need to accelerate the number of acres treated if we're going to make sure that the fires we saw last year are not our new normal.
So please correct me if I'm wrong on the numbers of their characterization. In the last 5 years, it's my understanding that we spend about $150 million per year on average responding to wildfires in the state of Washington.
That's correct.
$150 million a year. Do you believe that we can spend less than that on the front end and see better results on the back end?
I absolutely believe it. And we've actually proven
less?
that. We've proven this last year when we put the resources on the ground, pre-positioned them, leveraged our air assets, and got them on the fires quickly. We kept 95% and below 10 acres, and we were able to reduce the amount of damage even though we had way more fires. So if we remember 2015, we had 1,700 fires in Washington state, largely central and eastern Washington, 1 million acres burned. This last year, we had 1,850 in every corner of the state and only 440,000 acres burned. Still significant. What we realized was if we leverage our air assets, get those helicopters on the fire quickly, get control of them, get the hand crews in, we pre-position them, and we have enough firefighters to be able to contain that fire, we can keep the damage down, not only the risk to public and to communities, but also the risk to the landscapes. Every dollar spent up front, having those resources to keep the fire contained and keep them small, means we are saving a huge amount of money in having to fight larger fires, but also the cost to our economy and obviously to our health as we experienced this last year.
And the final question, just how do you make people realize that? People don't like writing checks on the taxpayer back. And sometimes when you say, I need all this money up front, it's hard to make people realize that it's actually going to eventually save you money down the road. So how do you make that sell to the taxpayer, to lawmakers in Olympia, that it seems like a lot of money up front, but in comparison to the money on the back end, the damage, the potential of lives lost, it's worth it? How do you make that sell?
I think the first part is telling them that we spent on one fire alone this year in the Twisp area, $60 million. That's more than my forest health and wildfire budget asked this year. So we're already spending that money. When we have already also proven, just through those numbers that I gave between 2015 and 2018, that with resource and capacity up front and having them in those key areas where we know the forest health is in a bad condition and we know we're going to see fires, we can keep them small. That's what we proved by 95% below 10 acres. Legislature is hearing this, they understand it, the public is hearing it, and we've proven it over the last year. This will make a difference.
All right, Commissioner of Public Lands Hilary Franz, we appreciate your time. And I think we were just chatting in the commercial break that you've been in studio with us now 3 or 4 times, and we've never had a Commissioner of Public Lands, or at least I haven't. And I think what that proves is that it's a serious issue, it's a timely issue, and the state is finally trying to get on top of this so we don't continue to have these wildfire seasons up here. So we appreciate you coming in, keeping us up to date, and we're going to be tracking this effort as it goes along.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Guys, back to you.